if you look up a typical Japanese breakfast and take a look at what comes up, you notice there are a number of key dishes and key ingredients that show up in most of these pictures. In particular, a lot of these sets have eggs. Notice you see these omelets around up top. There's just a full egg over in this one. And then maybe have more omelets. And then of course we have the iconic Japanese breakfast, Tamagoyaki gohan with a raw egg cracked on top.
Similarly, in how it's hard to imagine Italian cuisine without tomatoes, it's also hard to imagine Japanese food without eggs. However, like tomatoes' recent addition to Italian food, eggs are also a recent addition to Japanese food. Before the Edo period in Japan, there was a ban on eating meat, which included eggs. While people probably ate eggs in secret, eating eggs out in the open and often would not really be introduced as an idea until the arrival of the Portuguese, which caused eggs to have a really strong association with the West in Japan. When the ban on eating meat was finally lifted during the Edo period, and more egg dishes started to be incorporated into Japanese cuisine. During the Edo period, there are a number of egg recipes that appear in cookbooks, but one is the most popular entry into cookbooks, and that is Tamago Fuwa, which directly translates to egg fluffy fluffy. Though this recipe dates back to the Edo period, it still very much exists in that same form it was then today. And so we're going to be trying to make it ourselves and seeing why it's been such a long-lasting dish throughout time. Another dish that has survived the test of time and has become quite famous throughout the world is Tamagoyaki, which, though likely existed in some forms during the Edo period, was not really formally introduced into cookbooks until the Meiji era, but is a very popular dish today. And as we make them, I'll be telling you a little bit about the history of each dish and eating eggs in Japan. So let's get to it. For the first step of this process, we're going to be making some dashi. Now, normally you would make dashi from scratch, but don't quite have the time for that, so we're going to be using dashi powder instead. This is just some I got from H-Mart. The package does not actually have instructions on how much powder to water you want your ratio to be for making the stock, but I found a recipe on Just One Cookbook, and so we're going to go with that. I'll measure out the water for our dashi stock. Let's talk a little bit about dashi. So, like I said earlier, you normally make it from scratch, from things like mushrooms. Beneath the flag stay, I am using powder made by Ajinomoto. So, Ajinomoto, the company that is the largest producer of dashi powder, dates the history of dashi back to around 2,500 years ago. Now, when dashi was first actually made and what that time actually looks like is up to a lot of debate, but everyone seems to agree that dashi became really popular during the Edo period, which is also when egg recipes like the one we're making today started to become popular. So we're going to start by adding our water to a pot, and then I'm also converting from metric units to US customary, so all of this is going to kind of be eyeballing it and hoping for the best. Liters of water to this saucepan, and then adding around like 1 2/3 teaspoons of dashi powder. I'm going to go ahead and give that a stir, and now we're just wait for our stock to boil. Note when boiling things, you want to try to get it past a simmer, so little bubbles to more of a stronger boil. While we're waiting for this to boil, let's talk a little bit about the history of this dish and the history of eggs in Japan.
As I mentioned earlier, this recipe is the most common one amongst cookbooks during the Edo period. Tamago Fuwa is most closely associated with the Shizuoka prefecture, though it's not entirely clear who was the first to invent this. Now, Tamago, Fuwa can be and is eaten by just about anyone. Back in the day, this was very much a luxury dish. Eggs were not a common part of everyday foods, but were instead reserved for very wealthy and for special occasions. You'll notice this a little bit, but this recipe actually involves steaming the eggs. A lot of egg recipes in cookbooks throughout the Edo period involve steaming or boiling eggs. There's basically no raw egg, which is interesting because, as you saw earlier in the video, there are a lot of raw eggs in kind of today's understanding of Japanese food and what we think of when we think about eggs in Japan.
We'll get back to when raw eggs entered Japanese cuisine, but for now our water is boiling, which means it's time to move on to the next step.
We are going to add half a tablespoon of soy sauce, a little bit of pepper, and a little bit of salt as well. Now we're going to take this mixture and add about 2.7 tablespoons to a bowl. I know that that's a weird measurement. I'm making do with my US customary, guys. But so after we add that to our bowl, keep the rest of it in the pan. And now we're going to add to our bowl a little bit of mirin to when your heart says that it's enough. Mirin is going to dictate how sweet your Tamago Fuwa is. So if you think that you would like it to be a little less sweet, add less. More sweet, add more. Though I don't recommend adding too much because then it starts to taste real weird. And now we're going to add to our bowl 2 eggs, and that brings us to the most tedious, most difficult part of this recipe, which is mixing. Now, the recipe on our regional cuisines, which is where I found the recipe for this dish, says to mix well for at least 4 to 5 minutes with a hand mixer until creamy. Now, I did not have an electric hand mixer, so we're going to mix it by hand. I do not recommend this, but it is possible to get it done.
While I spend the next forever whipping up these eggs, let's go back to talking about the history of eggs in Japan.
Raw eggs would not actually become popular in Japan until the Meiji era. So we're talking like late 1800s to early 1900s. When we start to see dishes like the iconic Tamagoyaki gohan, which is the breakfast that we mentioned earlier. There are some theories about how this came to be. One is kind of a natural progression from dishes like egg rice during the Edo period, experimenting with those, moving from cooked eggs to raw eggs. There's also a theory that is part of a larger clean eating trend that was going on in Japan at the time, movement towards fresh, unaltered foods that was being written about. There's also increased industrialization, may have led to greater supply of eggs and changes in how Japanese people ate them. Soft-boiled eggs were also likely introduced during the Meiji era. So eggs in general are still very much a luxury good. Tamagoyaki gohan is not an everyday breakfast yet. All of this is still very much for people who can afford to buy nice fancy eggs. One question I had while researching this video is, what about salmonella? What was up with that? Was it a concern for people? Basically, yes. Japan's climate is actually perfectly suited for breeding salmonella, which is not great when you're eating a lot of raw foods like raw egg. Salmonella wouldn't really be a significant consideration for people eating these dishes and really the government until after World War II. Over the course of the early to mid 1900s, Japan saw a big rise in the number of chicken farms and also the number of chickens. The numbers of both of those would only increase after the war. The government promoting the laying of eggs and eating of eggs, as eggs could be, relatively easily transported and served as a really good source of protein and calcium for a struggling population like post-war Japan, when food was very scarce and nutrition was a big concern for everyone. Now, the Japanese government would respond to the salmonella problem throughout the 50s into the 70s by decreasing the number of layer farms. If we look at a graph of the number of chickens versus the number of farms, you'll see that there's this really sharp, plummet down throughout the 50s and 60s, and kind of ending in the 70s. This is when the Japanese government started to, really regulate what farms were doing to try to, streamline and secure the supply chain to make eggs just a safer food for people to eat. And it worked. Today, Japan has one of the lowest rates of salmonella throughout the world, while still consuming very large amounts of raw eggs. One thing I learned while I was whipping these eggs by hand for a really long time is proper technique. So, turns out I was doing it wrong for a lot of this, and my friend had to come show me how to do it a lot more efficiently. So you're going to tilt the bowl kind of down a little bit towards you, and then make sure that you're flicking up, so that the idea is that you want them to get airtime, so that you're whipping maximum amounts of air into the bubbles, and you want to start slowly and go faster. In the video for the recipe I found for this, the woman making the dish gets the eggs all the way to be almost white and have almost tripled in size and have these tiny little bubbles. Now, I didn't quite get to that point, but also I've been whipping these eggs for a really long time, and I come to the realization that hand whipping was only going to get us so far. So I stopped at this point when there were fewer large bubbles, and a lot of small bubbles, and almost kind of, I think I had about doubled in size. I forgot to film this part, but you're going to go back to your saucepan with the rest of your dashi and bring that to a boil. And once that is at a boil, you're going to pour your whipped eggs on top, take it off heat, cover it with a lid, and then just let it steam, just let it sit for 2 to 3 minutes. Don't want to go too long so that the eggs maintain their fluffy, fuwa texture. This is the finished product. And here's the finished product in a bowl.
Okay, now it's time for the final taste test. So here we have Tamago Fuwa. Probably could have boiled the dashi for a little bit longer, like got it to a little bit of a stronger boil. And probably, theoretically could have whisked the eggs a bit more, but I think our arms were dying. There's only so much time one has in a day, especially a modern person with more things to do than whisk an egg all day. So here we go. See how it tastes. That's actually really good. As the name implies, the eggs are quite fluffy, very fuwa. The dashi and the taste of, if you like the taste of soy sauce, these are definitely for you. You really taste the dashi. It's just the flavor is just soaked all the way through the eggs. It's just a very light, soft flavor. So I consider this a success. Yes, and happy cooking. Influencer era. Okay. So now that we've made our Tamago Fuwa, we're going to move on to another classic Japanese recipe that goes all the way back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that is Tamagoyaki. Okay, so first off, we're going to make our, mix batter for the omelet. So we're going to start off with 3 eggs. 1. Oh, that didn't quite go. There it goes. 2. 3. And now we're going to add a little bit of mirin, just until the spirits tell us it's probably sweet enough. Something like that. We'll see. Similarly, we're going to add salt until the vibes say that's probably good. 1 teaspoon soy sauce. And then 1 tablespoon of water. now we're gonna just take some chopsticks and just gonna break up the yolks and get it kind of mixed. Okay, so we're going to whisk until vaguely incorporated. Trying not to put in too much air. I think I added a little bit too much water tonight since I substituted mirin for sugar. But we're gonna find out. Okay, on to cooking.
This is my first time making tamagoyaki, and we did not have that iconic rectangular tamagoyaki pan.
So we're making do with a circular one, which is a lot more difficult, but is possible. So to start off, you're going to want to heat your pan and put a generous amount, grease it up with a generous amount of oil with a brush, and then pour a thin layer of egg on top. And then pretty immediately, if you have this, you should have this on medium to low medium heat, especially if this is your first time. As you get more comfortable, increase the heat. But it should start cooking pretty quickly, especially if your layer is very thin. You're going to want to fold it up and then roll it up before lifting it, greasing the pan, and pouring your next layer of egg. Well, my friend Rithika and I are attempting to figure out the technique of tamagoyaki making. Let's talk a little bit about the history of tamagoyaki. So the earliest version of tamagoyaki that we have on record is Tamago Funoyaki, which came about in the early Edo period. Around the same time, you had Usuyaki tamago, which is this flat crepe that you see here, which makes up the layers of tamagoyaki, and also kinshi tamago, which is the cut up little slivers that you see up at the top left of this picture. Usuyaki tamago and kinshi tamago came around in the mid-Edo period, and around the time that these were being featured in cookbooks. We also get one record of a thick omelet, but it had no description of how it was made, so we're not entirely sure whether this was the first tamagoyaki or not. Tamagoyaki would start appearing after the Edo period, the Meiji period, and then get more popular, though it wouldn't reach its full popularity until the 1960s and 70s, when tamagoyaki really took off. In fact, there's this kind of famous saying associated with tamagoyaki, which is Kyojin, Taiho, Tamagoyaki. The three things kids like. Kyojin, which is a baseball team. Taiho is a sumo champion. And then, of course, Tamagoyaki. Today, Tamagoyaki can be found in Japanese restaurants all across the world. It's a very popular recipe, it's fun to eat, and I also had a lot of fun making it. These days, you can also find a number of different styles and fillings that people put in it. We attempted to make tamagoyaki with nori on the inside, and actually, if this is your first time making tamagoyaki, I highly recommend making it with nori. This was so much easier to fold and roll, and is also very delicious. We also attempted cheese tamagoyaki. We just put shredded cheese in there, and oh my gosh, that was so good. Highly recommend. Depending on how thick you make your layers, you can make really small or really big tamagoyaki. I would say the batter that we made earlier makes around 2 tamagoyaki, though I imagine the size of your pan, how many layers you want in your tamagoyaki, and how thick those layers are would determine how many you end up with. Okay, so now that we have our tamagoyaki, let's go to cutting and tasting. These are our 2 attempts, and we're gonna see how they turned out, what the cross section looks like.
This is the most recent attempt.
Okay, that's pretty good. We've got some roll, some layer action going on there.
Nice. And then for this one.
Ooh, that came out pretty good. Yeah. Okay.
Nice. Pretty good. I want to cut into this cheese one first.
Do the cross sections. Start with cheese.
This looks pretty good.
It's so beautiful. The roll is so good.
Wow. That is so good.
Ah.
That looks Look how many layers there are in the cheese.
It's cheese.
Oh, that is so good.
It is.
Okay, should we do the other ones?
Yeah.
The seaweed one. Ooh. I can already see the inside. It's very interesting. Wow. Nice.
Yeah.
You can really see the seaweed layers.
There's the mush in the middle.
Nice.
Oh, that one's pretty.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful.
The cheese is really good. The cheese is really good.
Yay!
No layering, wow.
Yeah. We cooked. Literally.
This is really good. The cheese is amazing.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something new about eggs in Japan and are inspired to try making these dishes for yourself. Happy cooking and happy egg eating!